Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this edition of BookBytes. We've got some great news on the South African literary scene or the global literary scene as one would have it. Local author Damon Galgut won the Man Booker Prize this year for his latest novel, The Promise. It's the first time since 1999 when J.M. Coetzee won for the novel Disgrace. So we have a lot to celebrate as South Africans, but as Africans on the continent as well. For tonight's show, I have an award winning author, one of our literary greats, Mr. Mandla Langa. Uh, Mandla Langa was born in Durban, grew up in KwaMashu, and holds an MA in creative writing from the University of the Witwatersrand. In 1980, he won the drum story contest for the dead men who lost their bones, and in 91, he was awarded the Arts Council of Great Britain bursary for creative writing, the first for a South African. Langa's published works include Tenderness of Blood, A Rainbow on a Paper Sky, The Naked Song and Other Stories, The Memory of Stones, the award-winning The Lost Colors of the Chameleon, and the best-selling The Texture of Shadows. His latest novel is called The Lost Language of the Soul, and I had absolute delight of going through this book over the last few weeks. I welcome you, Mandla. Thank you for giving us the time to chat about this extremely thought-provoking novel that you've written.
Thank
Welcome
you
to the
so,
show.
thank you so much, Shafinaaz, and thanks to your listeners too.
Well, your works are far-reaching, and you need very little introduction. When it comes to a book of this nature, The Lost Language of the Soul, a powerful book, a provoking book, a political book in some ways as well. But what I'm interested in is this title, The Lost Language of the Soul, and how language and spirit transcends through the continent, as your protagonist is able to do. Speak to us about the title and developing the story through it.
One of the most important features for me is the question of xenophobia, which gripped South Africa very especially in the year 2008 and 2015. And it took me back to the years that I spent in exile when I was in Zambia in the year from 1981 to 1986, and where I saw how close the Zambians, their language, their culture was to our own. And in a sense, the book then pays homage to all the countries in Southern Africa, to the countries on the African continent, to share the fact that we're all connected by blood, by experience, by culture. And so the xenophobia, I believe, is not something we can celebrate. It's something that we need to fight, all of us. And so the lost language of the soul then pays homage to our connectivity, to our connectedness as people of the South.
This idea of writing a story in the way that you have about exile, about identity. But what I found particularly fascinating, and it's a challenge for a writer, but no doubt something you've done extremely successfully, is using a 14-year-old to carry through this narrative through the eyes of a 14-year-old, seeing the difficulties, the challenges. I mean, his life is at risk in many instances. Why the choice of this age of person as your main protagonist?
I chose the age 14 because in many cultures, in many circumstances, 14-year-olds are people on the cusp of adulthood. You are an adolescent, you're just about to become somebody of age. So it's a book that deals with coming of age. It's a book that we can call a quest. And 14-year-olds are notoriously curious. they investigate. So, given the boy's age and given the fact that his mother disappears and his father disappears, it's also a book about, an initiation into a different type of existence. And to be able to go into the head of a 14-year-old, I had to trust my memory when I was much, much younger. I also did a lot of research. I also was helped by the fact that the project originated as a master's project at the University of the Witwatersrand. And so I had a peer review going on with some of the people who would check me if, for instance, I started using the voice of a much, much, much older person.
I really enjoyed that because it would also allow this book to be not just an adult read. I think that it would appeal to teenage readers by allowing them a window into a world where we might think you want to protect children from the harsh realities faced across the continent, which this book reveals in a very beautiful way, in a very visual way as well. At the same time, you understand that Joseph Mabaso is observing all of this with a fresh eye because he makes observations that are very honest compared to the silences he observes between the adults. He doesn't understand why adults don't just speak their mind when it's so obvious that this would build that bridge that they need, both in the political spaces of the guerrillas that he travels across and his own parents as well. So I found his observations very honest, very authentic, and it would be very fitting for young people to read as well. If they want to know more about the African continent and what struggles were had, struggles that continue to be had. Um, I want to ask about the names of the characters because this always makes sense to me. I think of Chanda. What does the name Chanda mean? Because from the South Asian context, it speaks to moonlight or radiance. I want to hear a little about the mother, Chanda, and how she goes missing, and this lack of light is what it meant to me.
Yes. I think Chanda is also a Chinyanja name and has got a lot to do with exactly what you're talking about, with somebody who is
Okay.
full of revelations, full of possibilities of opening doors for others. And Joseph, of course, I had to struggle thinking about the name because I wanted a name that would have a fitting in just about all kinds of cultures. Now, when you look in Zambia, they love the name Joseph, but in South Africa too, and also at the biblical, as a biblical allusion, somebody who opens a way for other people to become richer, to become, who's also a dreamer. And this Joseph is also a dreamer of sorts.
I see him as someone who is in search of light, that radiance. So it's very interesting now that he is crossing the continent, not just as a young boy in search of his mother who is gone lost, but there's this greater story. I also made the reference in the comparison because in your novel, The Texture of Shadows, your group of people that are moving across the rebels are actually carrying a box that is causing a lot of consternation and bringing a lot of attention to them. Whereas here,
Right.
Joseph is that subject that they're carrying, but he has a lot of agency. He's opinionated. He's observing all the time. So he's in a live sort of transaction that's happening across, and they're learning, and he's learning from them as well. And he's not fazed by the challenges around him. So I find that a very powerful message for our youth,
Mm,
that coming with that clarity of mind, that passion, and that lack of fear is
right.
what we are capable of at different stages.
Yes. I think one of the keys to the story can be found exactly at the moment of crossing the river because the person that helps them is almost like a spirit medium. This man who's called John the Baptist, because he says to them that it is only the pure of heart who can cross that river and not be attacked by either hippos or crocodiles. And so Joseph and these guerrillas are people that are motivated by a very, very pure heart, a wish, a willingness to sacrifice themselves, even to try and change the circumstances of their fellow human men and women who are suffering under the yoke of oppression. But much more importantly, as I've said earlier, it's a quest. Joseph is in search not only of his parents, that is in a sense a given, but is also in search of his own identity in this whole maelstrom, this whole confusion of this vast and stammering continent. And I took this from my own experience, Shafinaaz, because when I went into exile, I crossed a river in Pitsani Mulapo between the border of Botswana and South Africa. And it was in October in 1976. And late at night, or very, very early in the morning, it's still very dark. And the river is incredibly frightful, frightening. And it was also in flood. So, in a sense, but I knew that to achieve what I had to achieve, I had to go through this. So in a sense, all of us in our lives, in whatever form, whether we're guerrillas or normal men and women on the street, there's a certain river that we have to cross to reach a certain level of purity, a certain level of enlightenment about whatever it is that we are doing. So these hardships in my mind are a metaphor for the what we can call the purifying fire that humanity sometimes has to go through to get that enlightenment.
Thank you for that explanation, because for me that's so deeply spiritual about both the human condition and how we transcend those challenges that are thrown at us in different ways. I mean,
Mm,
on the one hand, politically we speak about forced migration and the need of people to have to leave home for
mm,
the sake of safety, but also for, in many ways, to be able to stand up for rights, for the greater rights of and dignity of their people. And at
mm,
the same time, those challenges are undertaken as a way to gain that strength in the way that you've said. And this comes across in various forms in life. Um,
mm,
it stays with me that there's this young boy who came out of a home that was, this domestic life, this very curated, careful domestic life. And overnight,
mm,
his life is thrown into this disarray. And yet he makes the choice. He could have gone back home to the comfort of his siblings, but that angst that's born inside of him makes him take this different route.
mm,
Um, and so that was a very powerful carrier through the story, because I kept thinking,
mm.
there's this little boy. Recently, we've heard of the story of the kidnappings of four young children in the Limpopo where I
Yes.
grew up. And it's staying in everyone's consciousness that there's young people out there who are placed in situations where they don't have the tools perhaps to deal with it. But this is
Mm,
part of the struggle of life, and you've captured this in your novel in a very powerful way. So for me, there was that duality, that sort of
mm,
connection. What is your message for activists of this time, for people around the world who continue to struggle for their dignity and their rights, regardless of age, when that anger and that fierceness is born in them? What is your message
mm.
to them
You know,
beyond
you,
the scope of this book?
Shafinaz, one of the biggest inspirations for me has been the struggles of other people in other countries. I've seen, for instance, when I read, one of my spiritual moments is when I read poetry, which has always given me titles for books. I've just been reading A State of Siege by Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian poet. And there are other poets, Maun Beseiso, people like Faiz, Faiz, the Urdu poet from Pakistan. I read poems because in them you find the voice of a child. You find in them the voice of somebody that's grappling with what is going on in life. And it's a pure voice. There's no mediation that has gone into that voice. And then I look at the struggles of young people the world over. Today I was watching on television young girls from various parts of the world, from even our own country, speaking about the destruction of the environment in this COP26. And for me, that gives me a lot of heart. It gives me a lot of vigor and inspiration, because I know that even though we, the adults, have messed up the world, there are generations that are picking up the cudgel, picking up the spear, and forging forward. So, in a sense, I would like young people to read the book. I would like those who can maybe give interpretations to give those interpretations. But I want young people to read the book and also find something in it that can enrich their own lives and give them a lot of encouragement.
I really believe that this is a book that I would recommend, not just at university level, but the kind of book that should be a set work because it engages empathy for children of our time who can transcend different geographical and mental boundaries in order
Mm,
to make those shifts in thinking, and to have a better appreciation
mm,
for what we have around us, for the democratic ideals that those who have gone before, like yourself,
mm,
who have
mm.
forged for the way that we have right now. And you do this in a wonderful way as a form of activism, through your writings as well. What can we look forward to from the pen of the esteemed Mr. Mandla Langa? Do tell us.
Okay. I'm actually I've always have written women heroes, or women who are doing spectacular things. I'm writing now very slowly, uh, because I'm doing a lot of research on the fictitious life of a woman who's a widow who lives in South Africa, in an apocalyptic South Africa where everything has gone to hell and back, and how she helps communities to get back towards building a lasting, how do you say this, community, so to say. It's still very scattered, but I am putting in little pieces here and there. And I think it's going to be a book that maybe some people would like to read.
I believe that your books have made impact over the decades that you've been writing, and I know that anything further from your pen will definitely have a good impact. But more importantly, I believe that the Lost Language of the Soul is going to win a lot of awards over the next year or two when everyone gets to read it. I'm not just saying that to make my show popular, but I really think that you've managed to engage the consciousness of people of different ages who
Mm,
will be reading this because of Joseph's journey and the kind of people that he encounters on his journey, both in a spiritual sense and in the physical realm of moving across the continent in the way that he has. And so you've captured that for me, and I'll be recommending this, and perhaps getting a few gifts for the right people. Um,
no, thank
what
you
else
for
can
that.
what else can you tell us just in terms of writing characters that carry a political message across? Because in many ways, not just identity and
Mm,
divide is very much part of that politics that we talk about.
mm. Well, one of the things I believe in is that our lives, unfortunately, are governed by politics. The moment you wake up in the morning and go to a tap to drink water, you are already in a political context, because where you live, where you stay, where you work, who you stay with, and so on and so forth, is flavored by our political reality. And so I believe that people should be observers of their reality. Every day you should look around you and see what that surrounding means for you, and then start also to empathize with the people around you, because it's always in the lives of others that you can learn a truth about ourselves.
I agree, absolutely. And I hope that more people will be observing, writing poetry, and writing powerful texts
Mm,
that allow us a window into their lives and their considerations around them.
that is
Mr.
true.
Langa, thank you so much for your time, for writing these books, but also for giving us your time so that we can have better insight into your journey, your writing journey, and the process that goes into it. I look
No,
forward to reading more from your book, from your books.
thank you so much. Thanks to you for inviting me to your and introducing me to your listeners. All the best to you too.
I'm sure that readers will be picking up more of your books, more copies of your books as well. And we look forward to seeing you being celebrated for your work and
Thank
for the
you.
efforts that you put into our literary, for enriching our literary landscape.
Thank you so much, Shafinaaz. Thank you.
And with that, we heard from Mandla Langa, award winning South African author, about his latest novel, The Lost Language of the Soul. Until the next edition of Book Bites, this is Shafinaz. Thanks for watching once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.